That's some interesting and I say good news too, to hear that. Dr. Hildreth, schools are now reopened in most places around the country. Now I'll preface this to say I'm a parent. I have a 14-year-old who's vaccinated, but of course I have an 11-year-old who's not yet vaccinated. We've elected to homeschool until she can get vaccinated. But given the range of opinions, policies, and practices in place, is it a good idea for parents to send their children to school?
I think the short answer is, for most places, in my opinion, is not safe because mask mandates are not in place. And here in Tennessee, for example, we have a mask mandate, but the governor has given parents the option to opt out of this. They can send their kid to school without a mask. So a mandate with exceptions is not a mandate, it's just a recommendation. And recommendations won't stop this virus. The point of the matter is we are now seeing infection rates among children that are much higher than they've ever been. For example, for most of the pandemic, children accounted for about 14% of all the cases. That has crept up to about 24%. 1 in 4 cases are now in children. And even though children might do well with COVID-19, we know that children can get long COVID, this syndrome you have after you get over the virus. And since children are not small adults, their systems are still developing. The nervous system, circulatory system, skeletal systems, they're all still being developed. In fact, the skeletal system is not fully developed, for example, until we're in our early 20s. My point is, we don't know that long COVID, which affects the brain, the respiratory system, and other systems in our body, will that have any impact long term in a child whose systems are still being developed? Okay. So I believe not knowing the impact of long COVID on children, even if they have a mild case of COVID-19, we should do everything we can to keep COVID-19 out of our children, especially Black and brown children who happen to have higher rates of underlying conditions that make them more susceptible to severe COVID and to dying. In fact, according to the CDC data, most of the children who've died of COVID-19 happen to be Black and brown.
More than 250,000 children had new cases in the last week of August, the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a new report. That's the highest weekly rate of new pediatric cases since the pandemic began, and it's a 10% increase in 2 weeks as children are now back in school, particularly unvaccinated children under the age of 12. The National Newspaper Publishers Association continues to monitor this state of emergency, especially for Black and brown children. Good morning again, and welcome to Let It Be Known on this Thursday, September 9th, 2021. Marcus T. Coleman was appointed by the Biden administration as the Director of the Department of Homeland Security for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Marcus leads at the intersection of religious affairs, community capacity building, public-private partnerships, and crisis management to help people before, during, and after disasters. And of course, the nation is still dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Ida and other storms that have rocked the Northeast and the South. And of course, now let us go over the headlines this morning. A Florida judge ruled against Governor Ron DeSantis on Wednesday and allowed schools in the state to mandate face masks while the case is appealed at a higher level. The ruling from Second Circuit Judge John Cooper is effective immediately, and it means the state of Florida must stop enforcement of banning mask mandates, which ends sanctions against several school districts who have implemented such mandates. The decision comes amid heated showdowns between the state and some local school districts, which have insisted on requiring students to wear masks, and a surge of COVID-19 infections have swarmed across the state of Florida. In late July, the governor, who is Republican, issued an executive order that directed the Florida Department of Education and the Florida Department of Health to issue emergency rules giving parents a choice on whether their children should wear masks in class. The state threatened to withhold funding from districts that violated the order and that required masks for everyone. Now let us bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
And thank you so much for giving us the headlines. The Black Press of America this year is 194 years old. We're preparing next week for our National Leadership Awards reception, our virtual National Leadership Awards reception. I want everybody to register at www.virtualnmpa2021.com. Please sign up. It's free, but we want you to be adding to our database. So if you not only get a chance to see the awards reception, got some outstanding awardees, including Dr. James Hildreth, who was on with us yesterday, the president of Meharry Medical College, who also sits on the FDA panel about the vaccines, making sure that the health interests of African Americans protected during this pandemic. So you're right on, and I'm hope that the courts will overrule not only Florida but Texas, Georgia, all these states that are. It's interesting. The same states that are suppressing the Black vote are also suppressing Black health. Systemic racism is alive and well in America, and we need to do something to overcome it.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis was also in the news this morning. President Biden announced his intentions to appoint Dr. Tony Allen as the chair of the President's Board of Advisors on HBCUs. The board will advance the goal of the HBCU initiative established by the Carter administration to increase the capacity of HBCUs to provide the highest quality education to its students and continue serving as engines of opportunity. The Biden-Harris administration said it remains committed to supporting the vital mission of HBCUs through the American Rescue Plan and by forgiving capital improvement debt of many of these institutions. The Biden-Harris administration has already committed more than $4 billion in support. So congratulations to Dr. Allen, who became president of Delaware State University in January 2020.
Oh, yes. I know Dr. Allen. He's a great leader. And I think the Biden-Harris administration made the right choice. Once again, President Biden, Vice President Harris, they're keeping their promises, their commitments that they made to Black America in all these areas. And so we salute Dr. Allen.
Absolutely. And also in the news this morning, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton reintroduced her Protecting Independent Contractors from Discrimination Act to extend the same federal anti-discrimination protections enjoyed by employees to independent contractors. Eleanor Holmes Norton, the congresswoman out of D.C., says independent contractors who often do the same work as employees have almost none of the same protections, including health insurance, collective bargaining, retirement security, and even anti-discrimination protections. Her bill focuses only on discrimination, such as discrimination based on race, age, and gender, from which every worker is entitled to be free, the congresswoman said. So Eleanor Holmes Norton, the congresswoman out of D.C., she continues to work hard and pushing for equal rights.
Well, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is a freedom fighter. She was also one of the early leaders of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And she's a close friend of the Black Press of America. She also introduced the legislation to help ensure that the Black press gets advertising, federal advertising dollars. So once again, we congratulate and encourage all the members of Congress to support the bill that's been introduced by Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Absolutely. I want to say good morning to all those who are watching on Facebook, those who are watching on Twitter, YouTube, and whatever platform you decided to join us this morning. Special good morning to our chair who's watching from the Houston Forward Times, Karen Carter Richards. And also a very special good morning to our special guest this morning, Marcus T. Coleman. He was appointed by the Biden administration as the director of the Department of Homeland Security Center for FaithBased and Neighborhood Partnerships. Good morning, Marcus T. Coleman Jr.
Good morning, Mr. Brown and Mr. Chavis. How are you? This is a very full circle moment for me because I grew up reading the Arizona Informant, and while in college, I was reading the Washington Informer. So happy to be here.
Well, Brother Coleman, thank you so much, and congratulations on your positions with the Department of Homeland Security. It's a vitally important position. We congratulate you, and again, the Biden-Harris administration is keeping its promise, and we're looking forward to having a close working relationship between the NAACP and the Department of Homeland Security.
Absolutely.
And Marcus, so you're the director of the Department of Homeland Security Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Explain to our viewers, what exactly is that?
Good question, sir. So we are one of 13 centers across the federal government whose responsibility is to maintain coordination, collaboration, cooperation, and communication with faith-based and neighborhood organizations that are meeting everyday needs. We know people are feeding the hungry. We know people are involved in housing. We know folks at the churches and other faith-based organizations get people back to work. Our offices across the federal family under the White House Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships are focused on making sure that we can provide access to information, capacity building, and technical assistance to faith-based and community-based organizations. For my center, I'm located actually in FEMA. Many people may not know that after Hurricane Katrina, they had established this center to serve as a conduit between making sure the resources and the information that's coming from faith-based and community groups can be aligned and in sync with the work happening across the federal family that comes out of FEMA when it's time to respond. And so as of late, based on some of the headlines that you've already shared, from Hurricane Ida to the floods in Tennessee to the COVID vaccine outreach, we have worked alongside many of our faith-based and community-based partners to make sure that we're trying to help as many people as possible before, during, and after disasters.
Now, and speaking of disasters and after disasters, of course, Louisiana, Mississippi was hit hard by Hurricane Ida, and then the Northeast last week with the tornado that touched down in the New York City metropolitan area. A lot of people displaced, but you also mentioned in your comments there about COVID. How difficult was you guys' job after these events, and especially given the fact that we still have so many unvaccinated?
It's a wonderful question again. I appreciate that. So it has been challenging for sure, but I have been thankful that we have worked alongside many faith-based and community-based partners who are facing these challenges with us, from the nation's oldest civil rights organization, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the National Baptist Convention, USA, and many others, including other Black-led organizations such as Healthcare Ready, which is an organization that's focused on meeting medical needs in times of disasters. Our partnerships with these organizations are vital to making sure, one, that we get good information out. And I know NMPA has been about providing factual information, but we also know there are many rumors and scams out there, not just related to the vaccine, but of course, unfortunately, during disasters as well. And so we've really worked hard to make sure that we're aligning on messaging and communication, but we also want to make sure that those faith-based and community-based leaders that are providing those vital, critical needs in times of disaster, food, water, shelter, are all plugged in and engaged and aware, so that way we don't duplicate efforts. If we have state and local governments providing ice or providing some type of substance, we want to make sure that those faith-based and community-based organizations let their congregants and their community members know where to go. And in the event that there's a community or a gap, they work with us to make sure that we know where those needs are. And if we aren't able to provide government resources, we know as we have partners that are working through donations and acts of generosity and benevolence to meet those needs. And so it has been a challenge. It's not lost on us that this is a re-traumatizing event for many people. With Hurricane Ida landing on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, we recognize and know that for many people, it's been a challenge. And what we want to make sure that people know is that if you are in mental distress, or if you find yourself stressed out by the process of trying to get to recovery again, we want to encourage you to call the Disaster Distress Mental Health Line. That number is 1-800-985-5990. Once again, 1-800-985-5990. 5990.
And Marcus, talk about, if you will, a little bit about the post-incident national outreach that goes on. What goes into that, and how do you prioritize?
That's a good question. So I'll say for notice events like hurricanes, unfortunately, right, there's some disaster or some hazards like earthquakes that give us no notice. But with the hurricane pre-landfall, we were calling some of these national partners that I just mentioned before and others and asking a few questions. One, what questions did they have and were they aware or engaged in terms of potential impacts? We know many of our partners were actually participating in events on the March on Washington anniversary, the day before landfall for Hurricane Ida. So some of that conversation that we have a few days out pre-landfall for things like hurricanes affords us the opportunity to get connected and aligned with those national leaders, but then also making sure that they have the information they need to notify their state and their local leaders as well, to be mindful of some of the local, the guidance coming from local officials about sheltering and evacuation. And we know that's even more important in a COVID context, where maybe you aren't going to be able to shelter in place like you used to because you have to follow CDC protocols. And so working with our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners affords us the opportunity to make sure that when we do get connected with some of the groups that I mentioned and others, that pre-landfall, we're able to make sure that people can get to where they need to be safely, and they know what resources are available to them when there's impact. So of course, those first hours are critical. That's when we're in high life-saving, life-sustaining activities. We see partners such as the Cajun Navy also doing work for search and rescue, in addition to the United States task force that does search and rescue. And so we know neighbors help neighbors in those immediate hours and days. And we continue to come alongside that effort to do not just life-saving, life-sustaining information, but address issues related to power, related to communications, and the medical care system. It is a big job, and FEMA does not do it alone. We do it in support of our localities and states who have the lead for response and recovery efforts, and we do it alongside faith-based and community-based organizations.
Yeah, and before I throw it to Dr. Chavis, Marcus, when Hurricane Ida initially struck, the common refrain among many Americans was, "Where is FEMA?" While we know that FEMA was active doing some of the things you outlined this morning, do you think the agency is doing an effective job of making people aware of its present and valuable resources under the new administration?
It's an area that we continue to grow into. I'm under no impression that we're going to be able to meet the needs for everybody in terms of general public. I will say, long before landfall, our FEMA administrator, Deanne Criswell, was in close coordination and contact with all governors for impacted areas, pre-positioning commodities, making sure we're mindful of avoiding some of the mistakes and some of the decisions that were made 16 years ago. And so from that respect, we did our best to make sure that we coordinated alongside state, local, and tribal officials. I will say in times like this, especially when we talk about hurricanes or notice events that have multi-state impact, our operating posture and our first place of support are going to be to those local media outlets, to those local communities, to local government, and to the state. And so you may not have seen FEMA in terms of full force, maybe leading up to landfall and immediately after, but we do coordinate very closely ahead of time to make sure that we are following the local guidance and local ordinance from our mayors, our county executives, and the governors that we support in times of disaster. And of course, when the governor does request an emergency declaration or the governor does request a disaster declaration, those pre-positioned commodities, that information, the various programs that help people that are impacted by the storm, once approved by the president, can be activated. And so those are some of the things that we do. I think that National Preparedness Month, which also happens to be the month of September, is a great time for us to continue to expand our engagement to show that the FEMA's presence is a proactive partnership year round. We definitely don't want people to feel like the only time they can and should engage with FEMA is when there is times of disasters. We firmly believe that preparedness is going to be a key step that we can take together, and are thankful from our historically Black colleges and universities to our faith institutions to our civic organizations that have all taken that step to promote preparedness year round for their congregations and for their communities. Doing that with FEMA is one of the practical ways that my office will be taking a step in the months and years to come to make sure that people know where FEMA is and that we're here alongside them to prepare their communities, that if impacted, they have the steps they need to protect themselves and to have better recovery outcomes if possible.
Yeah, and real quick, one of our viewers who always asks a great question, Angela Conley, she says, are you affiliated with nursing home evacuations or just communities?
So my office in particular works primarily with faith-based and community-based organizations. I will say FEMA does support the state in its efforts to engage nursing homes and communities. I go back to Hurricane Irma, which is another disaster that I've supported in a prior capacity. We're aware of the challenges across the board when it comes to our nursing homes and other hospitals and medical facilities. And we're also aware of the compounding challenges that come up as a consequence of COVID. This is part of the area where FEMA comes alongside our partners, not just in the private sector, but in thinking about some of our nonprofit partners as well, again, that supply some of the medical needs and provide ground truth. I had a wonderful conversation actually with a group of about 100 or so clergy from Louisiana. And this very question came up about not just what was happening in nursing homes, but them asking what they can do to help support to make sure that all of the information and supplies that are needed are brought there. But they also were very clear with us that they were mindful that they're going to engage at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level to advocate for the best quality of life for those folks that find themselves maybe immobile or unable to move or to evacuate or to shelter in a new location due to medical needs. And so the nursing home thing is something that is very important to me personally. I can say professionally, while I don't work with them directly, we do look to our faith-based and neighborhood partners to make sure that we stay engaged on what their ground truth is and how we can work together as best we can to meet some immediate needs while the state and other government agencies continue to work with those specific facilities to address issues and challenges faced by survivors in nursing homes.
Dr. Chavis?
Yes, Brother Coleman, I think there are a lot of great issues and points of contact between the Black Press of America and what you do there at the Department of Homeland Security in terms of faith-based organizations. So we want to have a discussion with you about how the Department of Homeland Security can utilize our network of Black-owned newspapers and media companies across the country. We reach millions of people every week through our print, through our digital, through our social media channels. And we would like to have an ongoing relationship with you and particularly with our faith-based. We already have a strategic alliance with our major denominations, the National Baptist Convention, the AME, and others, as well as the NAACP and all the organizations that you mentioned. I think consistently in preparation, even before, since we know national disasters are on the rise because of climate change, we would like to propose to doing something preparatory across the country just to keep African Americans much more informed on have a state of preparedness, a state of readiness, so that when these natural disasters happen, we are much more prepared as a community.
And we'd be honored to do that. And I'll just take a personal point of privilege to point to the folks that helped me get here. The International Association of Black Firefighters. We have Black psychiatrists, Black psychologists, Black doctors, Black dentists. To your point, it's a lot of people that I think have been trying to find different ways to get folks ready. And we'd be honored to come alongside NMPA and continue that discussion. It is something that we definitely are interested in. And to your point, climate change has consequences today. The frequency, the severity, and just the sheer scale of disasters continues to increase exponentially. And so I think that collaboration with NMPA and other partners to address the wide range of issues that come when communities are impacted by natural hazards and other disasters. I know many of you may have seen the news. Howard University, my alma mater, just had a ransomware attack. Yes. And so when we start thinking about how we continue to work together and have these conversations, I know NMPA is a leader in providing that pertinent information, but then also as a leader to make sure that folks have the necessary education to take some practical steps to protect themselves, their families, and their community. So we'll be honored to continue that discussion more in depth.
Very good. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah. And Marcus, given the continuing impact, you mentioned climate change. What are your thoughts on home construction and other development activities that continue to take place on floodplains throughout the country?
That's a wonderful question. So actually, prior to my current role, I was supporting an effort in the private sector to help people understand their flood risk, and also make sure that people knew their options in the event that they built somewhere where there was known flood risk. As you all know, repetitive loss flooding continues to be a challenge. Now, what I do know, and I'm not shy about, and I won't ever walk away from, is some people can't move. They for whatever reason, they've grown up in a particular neighborhood, that their conditions may be such where it may not be as simple. I think about Princeville, North Carolina, one of the first townships established by formerly enslaved Africans. You have a lot of people there. It's personal to them. That's their home. It's intergenerational. So they can be impacted by Hurricane Floyd in 1999 and then be impacted by Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And some folks may not have the means to rebuild somewhere else. What we do as an agency is we do continue to provide some of that information. I think this administration are taking steps to help empower those who decide and feel it's best for their family and for future generations to be able to relocate to a new community. But we want to be clear, climate change is not something that you move away from, right? Yeah. So if it's not flood, it's drought. If it's not drought, it's wildfire. If it's not wildfire, right? So the different impacts from different storms, we are very mindful and want to continue to take climate action or take action alongside faith-based and community-based organizations that are addressing some of the immediate impacts of climate to help inform and influence those people that have different types of flood risk, different types of risk from other natural hazards, and take whatever necessary and practical steps they need to mitigate the damage that can be caused by those disasters.
Yeah, and real quick, as the time winds down on us, Marcus T. Coleman Jr., Dr. Chavis recently wrote a great op-ed about homelessness, and he specifically talked about New York City, but it was really nationwide. Bobby Henry, one of our publishers at the West Side Gazette down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, says, what are the efforts for addressing the homeless?
So this is heavy on my mind and heart as right? The eviction moratorium has been lifted. And so we really aren't sure what the impacts are going to be. When we talk about addressing homelessness, there's a few federal partners that we work with, but of course, there's a host of faith-based and neighborhood partners as well. Federally speaking, we have the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, which includes representatives from multiple agencies, including Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, and others to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness in disasters. There's actually some helpful planning guidance for local officials and community members to think about how to plan for people experiencing homelessness in times of disasters. I think some practical steps that FEMA has taken is we have a program called the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. This is a federal support to faith-based and community-based organizations that help to address the needs of people experiencing homelessness with the intent, right, to move folks from experiencing homelessness to be able to find a place that is safe for them and for their families. And so that's an example of one particular federal program among many. As I mentioned, many of those efforts are coordinated across all of the federal family and in support of local communities through the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. And so we know, again, being a few months into this administration and knowing the changes and the continuing challenges that we have from the COVID-19 pandemic, homelessness is going to be a big issue, not just in the everyday world, but also when we have communities that are experiencing disasters from other natural and man-made hazards as well.
Yeah, and as Bobby Henry says, for those who are unaware of Princeville, North Carolina, please read about it in the Black press. Dr. Chavis, your closing thoughts with our director of the Department of Homeland Security Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, Marcus T. Coleman Jr.
Well, we are excited and enthusiastic about the potential possibilities now that Brother Coleman, I started to say Dr. Coleman, Brother Coleman is in place. I think that you mentioned the interagencies. I think we would love to have an opportunity to talk with HUD, Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Securities, all of the various federal agencies. I think that we can align with the Black press, Brother Coleman, to get this information out, vital information that you've shared this morning, proactively. We in the Black press, we want to do as much as we can to inform our constituents, our readers, our viewers, but again, way before something happens, rather than just reacting after something happens. And I think that we now know that one of the reasons why COVID is having such a devastation in Black America is because of the pre-existing conditions. We need to bring you back, because one of the things we did not get into was the Department of Justice has declared that white supremacist organization is the greatest threat to American democracy today. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, and we can bring you back for a more detailed answer, was how the Department of Homeland Security and FaithBased can help keep our people aware of the dangers of the resurgence of these white supremacist organizations in our communities across the country.
I'd be honored to come back and talk about domestic violent extremism and some of the impacts. I do want to leave with one resource, and I'd be remiss if I didn't share this for folks. If you are impacted by Hurricane Ida, the wildfires, floods, and you have heard that there is FEMA assistance available to you, please call 1-800-621-3362. Once again, that's 1-800-621-FEMA. Or you can register through the FEMA app, or you can access disasterassistance.gov. To your point, Dr. Chavis, and I thank you for all of your leadership and service. Again, growing up, I was able to see and see some wonderful role models, including yourself, in the work of NNPA. I'd be happy to talk about some of the challenges from domestic violent extremism and other issues and concerns to the Black press and to the communities that the NNPA has served for many years, and continued success to the organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
And don't forget to check out the NNPA and the Black Press of America on TikTok at NNPA Black Press. That's NNPA Black Press on TikTok. And make plans, as Dr. Chavis alluded to earlier in the program, to attend or join us for the NNPA's National Leadership Awards reception, September 16th. Register now. It's next Thursday, September 16th at www.virtualnnpa2021.com. You see all the honorees, but we're going to have a very special interview before the awards with Gabrielle Union. So tune in, join us next Thursday at virtualnnpa2021.com. Let it be known. Remember this, setting goals is the first step in turning the invisible into the visible. Tomorrow, Jeffrey Boney of the Houston Forward Times joins us on Let It Be Known. Have a great day, everyone.